Welcome to another episode here at Lightingbot. We have a wonderful guest visiting us today here called Willow Sorour. Hopefully, I pronounced the last name correctly. I actually didn't remember to ask her that. Just a quick head start in terms of the Lightingbot community while we wait for people to jump in. Don't forget, we do portfolio review, we do community highlights, we do Unreal tutorials, Unity tutorials. Actually, part 3 was released today. We also do lighting mentorship, and don't forget, we have an extensive amount of interviews from all kinds of companies, people, individuals, and so on. So do have a watch, like, subscribe, and share. And let us get started to what we want to get started to, which is let's welcome Willow. Hello, Willow.
Hey guys, it's nice to be here.
All right. So, Willow, you are still, I believe, a junior lighting artist, title-wise anyway, right?
Yes, I am.
So, you started quite recently at Firesprite, correct?
Yeah, within the last 2 weeks.
Right.
Very recently.
Which is, I don't think I knew about that because when we scheduled, I think originally you were at Supermassive at the time, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I checked your background again just to make sure, I was like, I'm pretty sure she wasn't Supermassive when I scheduled this. But that's a nice surprise. So you were a freelance artist before Supermassive, correct?
Yep.
And I believe you were also studying at Escape Studios in this same time.
I was, yeah. So I studied at Escape Studios for 3 years, which was the bachelor's degree in game art.
So do you want to walk us through, now I went from present backwards. So do you want to walk us from past to present, like what happened during Escape Studios, what did you learn, and also what did you do as a freelance artist, is it connected to lighting, and so on and so forth? Why don't you give us a walkthrough a little bit?
Sure. So I got into Escape because previous to that I was doing fine art and photography. I always did art from a very young age, and then I always played video games. The two kind of went hand in hand. When I found out there was a course for that, I very happily went and applied. I got in, luckily, even though I took a very massive, big oil painting portfolio with me to get into that course, which was a faff to be on the London Tube with, if any of you know what London Tubes are like.
Yeah, I do, obviously.
Yeah.
I've been living here for a couple of months, so it's
Like
definitely a
this
good experience.
thing was not an enjoyable experience. But got in, joined. The first year was very much exploration. So we did a combination of game art, VFX, and animation. I decided I definitely did want to do the game art course, and I carried on through that. And then through the second and third year is more a focus on environment in general. So you'd work within teams to produce small little environments, some of which you can see in my portfolio. But I always took the role as a lighting artist through that. I kind of got into lighting because of the photography stuff that I'd been doing, which was the freelance work that I was doing in between that. And it felt quite natural.
Right.
Like it was stuff that I already had quite a fundamental knowledge on. It was composition and shade. And it kind of came quite instinctive from the creative point of view. And I think once you have the creative eye for it, taking the time to, live in documentation until you understand what you're looking at, it is a bit of an easier thing to do. I think it's harder to teach the eye than it is the technical. So I spent pretty much all of my summer going through Unreal documentation. That's what I train in. I'm an Unreal artist. Sorry, Unity people. And kind of built out my portfolio, did a couple of my own little pieces, and then, like I said, mainly worked as a lighting artist within those group projects for my degree. I applied to my first role in my third year, and got it about 3 weeks before we actually finished our degree. So I started working. I had to basically finish my project early so I could start work, which was a really nice position to be in as a student, of course. But that was unfortunately also through the lovely COVID pandemic. So it was kind of a bit of a shamble, but we got there.
All right. So obviously, what's interesting is a lot of people that have a fine arts background or photography who comes into lighting, and it's obviously something I've noticed is an advantage of if I compare people who don't have it and look at their piece versus people that do have it and look at the piece, including me who don't have a fine arts background or a pure photography background. I can notice the difference in probably how much time I'm spending trying to figure out something versus someone who has already gone through the basics. But I also got into photography and then realized there was something with the lighting through photography. And for your information, I'm just learning oil painting as we speak this month. Just started. Yeah, that's also quite interesting. So what do you think is the value of photography, oil painting, fine arts? Why do you think it's important to have a not just a basic understanding of it, but like a good foundational skill for it when it comes to transferring it over to lighting?
I think if you look at what lighting is fundamentally, it is understand, especially in games when your whole idea is to drive someone through a map. It's composition and tonal difference, and when you get further than that, it's understanding color. Those are all basic principles within fine art and photography. And if it's something, if you go through life doing fine art and photography, particularly more so photography, I think if you have the basic, like I don't think every lighting artist needs to be able to paint an oil painting, as great fun as it is. But I think being able to understand how to compose a shot and why that shot works when it is composed correctly. Like, do you understand the importance of that negative space and how that light direction is and where that golden ratio is setting? If you can kind of understand why that works, then it's going to bode you very, very well in where to initially place a light in a scene or where to angle directional. I think they just go very, very hand in hand.
All right. So do you notice that it has made things easier for you because you have that kind of background and knowledge, or compared to other people, or didn't you notice it and it just was like a given, I guess, in this case?
I don't like to compare, but I think being able to look through lenses and already kind of break down those shots, it means that I'm always kind of working, which I think, practice makes perfect, even though I don't believe in perfection. But I think because you're continuously looking at things that way and you think, oh, that would be really cool if it was like that, it improves your work subconsciously, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth in that. So in terms of being able to transfer this knowledge to lighting, how's your journey been in terms of learning the technical parts as someone who comes from a more traditional 2D background?
Like, I won't lie, when I first started getting into the technical stuff, it scared me. I think that's quite normal, though. If you look at the amount of documentation you're going to have to read, and that is still growing. But I think with the technical stuff it is continuously growing because the nature of our jobs, it's technology. So it's very much so about kind of keeping on top of it, learning the rules, and then learning to see if you can break them.
That makes sense. So during time as a student at the, I believe, Escape Studios, was it right? What are the key things that you learned as a student that you feel is very useful to you now?
Escape was very good at putting an emphasis on teamwork, which obviously as you get into the industry, you're working on a team towards a larger project than yourself. So it's an important skill set to have, and how you communicate. As a lighting artist, I think it's very important that you know how to communicate with the rest of the team, because we tend to be the ones that break stuff most of the time.
I can relate to that. So from my experience too, at the moment, a lot of stuff is breaking in the game I'm working to. But I think that's very common. There's not been a project where it's not been like something going on, and you need a tech artist or a coder or someone to also help you in some cases as well. Um, so let's talk a little bit about your journey from Escape Studios. You were doing freelancing at the time. Um, what made you prepared to get into the industry, and how did you get into the industry as well?
I think when it comes to getting into the industry, you kind of can't take no for an answer. You can't let it beat you down. You kind of got to keep pursuing, and if someone says no, you got to figure out why they say no, and then actually work towards changing that. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people hear no a couple of times and kind of get a bit beaten down with it, which is very understandable. But unfortunately, that's because the work is so fast changing. We can't do that. So I applied to different places and I asked for continuous feedback, and that was from my peers, that was from my tutors, that was from friends who I knew who were in the industry, and I just you just kind of keep applying until you get to an interview stage, and then you just gotta fight for how awesome your work is. I wish there was like a magic trick that I could give people, but I don't think there is one. I think it's try to be really, really good at what you do and keep trying.
Right. So would you say perseverance would be a key thing in your case, that not being kept down, and kind of having the constant pushing through challenges, some maybe even imposter syndrome. A lot of people that I talk to have imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, I relate to that one.
Yeah, me too. A bit more than before for some reason, even though it doesn't make sense, because over time you should be feeling more confident. But
Oh no, I think it's completely the opposite. I think the more you know, the less you realize you know.
yeah, it seems to be the case. It's like you're super confident in the beginning, and then things are going well, and things are great, and then you're like, no, 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 I don't know. I'm
Well,
too
like
afraid.
on that point, I think there's a balance between like I do a thing where I go, I know how I think about my own work, which is terrible, but I don't talk about my work like that because that doesn't serve you. So there is also a balance between being humble. Like if you are a student who's going in for junior positions, you're going to have to be prepared to, you can't think you're fantastic because you're going in to learn, and you have to appreciate that. And you're going to have to appreciate that as a lighting artist. We hear feedback from everyone. So
Yeah,
you
that's
can't
true.
be too sensitive.
So, without going into too much detail in terms of your work, what's your workflow when you're working? Are you working directly with art directors, or lead, or both, or like what's the process in terms of getting green light or feedback? How does that work for you in general, generally speaking?
So generally it is, you talk to who is your direct lead, and then that conversation gets pushed forward to art director, and that conversation then gets pushed forward to the wider team. Um, and you ask for feedback a lot. I think one thing I see a lot of people make the mistake of is they don't ask for enough feedback.
Okay, that's definitely an interesting topic to pick up on, because that's always interesting to have a different view on as well. So, why do you think people are not asking for feedback?
I think it's a multitude of things. Like people get scared, you get a bit precious over people's works. Like I know I could, change lights until forever before I decided a piece was happy with. But I think a good technique is to fail as quickly as you possibly can,
Right.
because the sooner you fail, the sooner you know where to go right.
Hmm.
And I don't think failing's a bad thing. Like when I say that, I mean ask for feedback as quickly as something as you can before you actually feel comfortable with it, and then someone can immediately give you more ideas and more information. Um, and that might be a failure, but it's something that's going to be pushing you into the right trajectory.
Right. So, what advice do you think you could give then to someone who is doing a lot of work, but not really asking for feedback. Like, how would you suggest that they approach feedback in a respectful way as well? Because, as you know, a lot of people they might ask for feedback, but then when they get the critique, they're quite sensitive as well and defensive, and they go on to sometimes defend themselves or give reasons rather than listening to the critique and such and such. So, what's your experience with that, and do you have any advice for those kind of people?
I think you have to let go the defense. You just have to let that go. And even if someone gives some feedback and you do have a rebuttal to it because you're like, oh, I haven't got there yet, or this was my initial attention, don't say anything. Just let the feedback come in, let the critique come in, and you can go away afterwards and absorb that. Because you have to remember, critique is not critique towards you, it is just the person's opinion, and you have to learn what is useful in that opinion to take out.
Right. And in terms of getting critique and feedback, do you think people should be somewhat careful or aware of who they're asking feedback from, and that might affect the quality of feedback, and also if it's important at all?
Yeah, I think it does. You one ask people that you trust, and trust professionally, like you know that they know their stuff. And when I say that, ask people who you admire and you think do good work, and people that you want to be like. Ask those people for advice, and don't ask, if someone doesn't have anything to do with the art or the lighting side, like they're just completely unresolved from that, like they're a coder, probably not the best person to ask straight away. Like,
Right.
ask other artists who you see as better than you.
Right. So sometimes when I ask people, I specifically ask maybe a concept artist or a photographer, because they will be more picky and more experienced in terms of maybe composition or framing, compared to a purely a lighting artist in my experience. And then I might ask someone else for color, maybe a color scripter from TV shows or something, because they tend to be more experienced in terms of picking color. Painter would also be, but the challenge I have with asking people who are like concept art and painters when it comes to color is their perception of color is a bit different than the way we approach lighting and color. So you get kind of like a creative version of color, and that doesn't always work in my experience and my opinion when I'm doing lighting anyway. So that's the pitfall that I used to get into anyway when I was asking for feedback. But also then you get different feedback as well. So how do you deal with, um, say you ask four people and they know their stuff, they consider some of the best, for example, or you consider them the best at least, and they all give contradicting feedback. So what do you do? How do you deal with that then? uh,
So this goes into the thing I was saying, where you need to learn what is valuable feedback and what is not. And that comes through practice. That comes through, getting multiple. And this is why I say get feedback as quickly as you can, because then the sooner you can learn this. But when you ask for people's feedback, in mass majority, they are going to have slightly different opinions. I've had areas where I've asked 3 different tutors for work, and they've all told me 3 different things. And that's where you kind of go, okay, what piece of information that everyone said was actually somewhat a commonality, and that it could include to some level and still follows the initial intent that I had for that piece.
right. Yeah, so you guys heard it here first, right? This is another person saying feedback is important. Willow is saying it, not me. So go ask the feedback. Remember, we do have different Discord servers, different communities. So I think people should be posting more. I am very eager to. That's why I ask people, and including you as well in this case, is because I get a lot of private DMs, but I would also love to see more public uh, sharing of work, so a lot of people can give their point of view, because I never really think one person knows everything regardless of how skilled they are, and I do think it's good to have different points of view. So talking about different points of view, do you want to share your screen and we can go through some of your work, and maybe we could also talk about like what would you do differently now based on your experience compared to when you did some of your pieces?
Sure. Do we want to go through earlier work and then?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, you can go to the earlier, you can break it down, and then you can, if you want to, you can explain, okay, I would have done this differently now, or picked another color, or changed the composition, and so on. Assuming the share button works on your end, obviously, because we didn't actually test it. There we go.
Is that working?
Yep, I've got you on screen. So everyone, you see it says Willow, and how do you pronounce your last name anyway?
Sorour. It's a bit of a weird one.
Sorour.
Sorour, yeah.
Willow Sorour. So search her up. Go click follow. Job done. All
Thanks.
right.
Brilliant. So we'll start with an earlier piece, right? Because that's the easiest way to show progression. So this was my first specialism piece in Escape Studios, hence the Escape Studios slanged on it. The idea was you downloaded a piece of environment, you lit it, and you lit it in 3 different lighting scenarios, which I think I uploaded all of them. Yes. So I look at this now, and I think, holy crap, that's awful.
Why is it crappy?
So to me, I think it now I feel like it's flat. God rays are overblown. It's too dramatic. There's not the right shadow levels in it. Textures look a bit flat. That's all stuff that I mean. But when I did it, I was really proud of this, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how progression works. So you can see some stuff in this just doesn't make sense. Like the level of God ray is just unholy. Excuse the pun.
Unholy.
You know, this God ray doesn't make any sense from the directionality. But there is a reason why I've left this on my portfolio, because it shows growth, right? And I don't think if you were proud of something at the time, then you should post it. Like if that was the best you could do then, cool. And right. You learn a lot, right? Sorry if it's background noise.
You also learn you live in a big city with a lot of police cars every hour or so.
I am sorry. Anyways, yeah. And this was it was my first exploration into how could lighting change mood, because that's what lighting is. A lot of the time it is a mood setter. It is a narrative tool, and an extremely powerful narrative tool. So I went from stuff like this to stuff like this, which is more of my recent work.
Right.
And there's just a massive contrast there, right? Like I mean, I still see issues with this because it's my work and imposter syndrome. But but that I have to even appreciate, even in my own imposter syndrome, is that there's an improvement. But some basic principles still stay the same. So there are a couple of things that I would tell any young lighting artist or anyone who wants to do more lighting is set up the basics first. So establish, and I'm pretty sure this is advice that gets said a lot, but establish a direction, get your atmospherics in there to a base level, get your world settings right, make sure you're getting a good GI bounce, and then start doing other things. But the thing is, I think a lot of people do those things and they think it only takes a little bit of time. That stuff takes days if you want to do it properly. Like getting the establishing look right, that if you can do that right, you're good. Like it's going to be a good piece.
So what you're saying is you advise people to pick the shots first before doing any lighting, at least when the way we work when we're doing personal pieces, obviously.
Yes. Obviously, if you're doing something that a character can work around, it's a different piece. But if you're talking about portfolio and getting hired, pick your magic shots, right? And pick nice compositional shots and take your time with it, because that's what people are going to see on your portfolio straight away.
And this is why you mentioned earlier as well the importance of understanding to traditional art, photography, composition, because when you do your own pieces, you are actually responsible for most of it, which is not always the case if you're doing in a company. Then it might be cinematic artists and so on and so forth, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's still good to know it even in that case, right? So that's why we're talking, I guess, as well about the importance of learning the other skill set, is how to present your piece in its best possible light.
Exactly.
Pun intended.
Yeah. But yes, exactly. And the thing is, even if you are then working in a company and you're working with people who have, you're working with cinematic artists who've done your sequences for you, if you have figured out this stuff beforehand, because you've done it in your own personal work, you're going to know how to make their shots look like magic. And if you can make a cinematographer happy and the rest of the art team happy, you're doing your job well.
Right.
Like, a part of a lighting is the magic when people finally load up the scene and they're like, oh, this looks cool now.
So, interesting question. So, how come you didn't show the street in this particular composition?
Because none of the magic was happening in the street. There's some shots where you're kind of
what's
like
happening in the street? Okay.
some of the shots where you kind of, when you make a shot, you want to include the mood that you're trying to get with this. So it's a darker environment. Things that tend to be dark, you kind of want, from my experience anyways, there's a sense of foreboding if you shoot things vertically and narrow. So that is why. And again, kind of, you want slightly off symmetry a lot of the times. So you kind of want symmetry because it's a very Kubrick thing to do. But I think you kind of need to know where you can break it, which again, it just comes from practice of cinematography studies.
Just to backtrack a little bit as well, but you can keep the window open as well. When you were doing freelancing, did you do any? What was the type of job specifically you were doing when you were doing freelancing?
Photography work.
Photography work. Have you ever had the opportunity to do any freelancing work in terms of lighting, or are you just sticking to studio work?
No, I haven't done any freelance work in my lighting. That's just been with the companies that I've worked with. The freelance work was all photography, and that including a arrangement of environment and a lot of portraiture, because what you get paid for most as a photographer tends to be people's faces.
So, out of curiosity, because we do get questions, generally speaking, we get questions about freelance work in specifically lighting, though. But it's kind of interesting to know your approach to doing freelancing as a photographer. Like, what's the approach? Is there anything you think is transferable for anyone trying to do freelancing in their own area of expertise, like lighting or look development, or these kind of things? In finding work, is there a specific skill set required to do that in your experience as a freelancer? Because you were a freelancer for a few years.
I think the importance when you freelance is that you need to know your sale point. So I see a lot of people, which is very sad. I see a lot of freelance artists undersell themselves, as in the sense that they will, if they broke down what they got paid per hour, it'd be under minimum wage, which is a massive issue. Like, if you're a freelance artist, you've got to actually think about what each hour of your work is worth, and make sure you establish that to clients straight away.
Did you learn any mistakes in your specific situation as a freelance photographer that you think might be common, just generally speaking, when it comes to client work and so on?
Make sure your clients sign contracts so they have to pay you. And make sure if you're signing a contract, you've read it very thoroughly.
Right. That's a good advice. I was actually asking because JLA was asking some questions about it, and he agrees with you. Even though we're talking specifically photography, which I think is still relevant because it's photography, so there's still some lighting involved. It's just a different context and not in front of the computer in this case, but I still think it's relevant. So you're using all of these skills in your portfolio that you're showing now, obviously, which is why you picked this angle, because you thought that this is more exciting. This serves the purpose. The magic is there, and this is because you also have some experience doing photography, but mostly portrait photography, correct? With people.
Yeah, which does help if you're working with a lot of characters.
Did you do any characters at all, knowing that you actually have the background for it, or you purposely just pick
I haven't done any
architecture?
characters in my portfolio, but I have worked on characters.
Okay. So you purposely pick architecture because you wanted to practice like architecture, or was it just because you had to?
I picked architecture because I enjoy it. It's
Hmm.
what I enjoy doing in my freelance time. I like character work, I really, really do, but I do a lot of it professionally. So you like to do different things.
Yeah, obviously. So this piece, how long does it take you to make, for example, this piece?
So that's quite a good question because it kind of goes back to what I was saying before of don't stay with something too long. So I give myself time limits. So with this, I think I gave myself a week, and that wasn't working on it solidly for a week. That was working on it for like 15 to 30 minutes a day between and after work. But I kind of give myself a hard deadline of when that day comes. I either have to be happy with. I'm either happy with it and I post it, or it goes into a little vault somewhere that I can go back to at some point.
And how do you, because that's also relevant to know in terms of even professional context or even contracting and freelancing, is sometimes you have to estimate the time it takes to light an environment. So do you have a specific approach that you look at that environment, you look at the size and go, okay, I do need at least this amount of time to even be able to get something good if I do get something good?
So it's about size and complexity. So just because the scene's big doesn't mean it's very complex, and just because the scene's small doesn't mean it's not incredibly complex. Because that includes things like, are the cinematics? Is there a very specific feel and mood that they want that might take iteration and time? Is the color palette quite extensive? Is there going to be a lot of post processing? Like these are the kind of questions I'd ask myself.
Okay. And in terms of workflow, when you are estimating and doing an interior scene versus exterior scene, do you have a different workflow?
I do. So an exterior scene would be a lot more based on your skylight, um, and your general illumination. A interior scene, it's a lot more about figuring out what your key lights are, and obviously that will change from interior to interior.
Okay. And with these portfolio pieces you have, is there one piece that is your favorite? Is it this one or is it another piece?
Um, Probably the shot that's in my like little background. I don't think that piece is my favorite, but that shot is my favorite. Um,
Right.
but that might change soon if I have to look at it for too long.
Talking about looking at something for too long, I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but I call it color blindness or lighting blindness when I talk about it. Is when you're doing lighting for extensive period of time, and that could be like a few hours a work day, for example. Do you have experience that you kind of having difficulty working on the same scene? Because it's like you can't really see the difference, so maybe you go and use some tricks to kind of reset your brain, or maybe you work on something else. Do you have you experienced that kind of challenge before?
Oh, all the time. I think it's if you look at anything for too long, no matter what art discipline you're doing, you're gonna be blind to it. And I can feel it at this point. Like if I look at something for too long, I go, I don't know what the errors are anymore. I have a cat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. I heard you had some kind of pet in the background, so I was like, is it a dog? Is it a cat? I was trying to figure out, but now we know it was a cat.
That's a cat's a cat. But yeah, like I think I forgot what I was saying now. Jesus, I'm sorry.
It's all right. No rush. So you were saying about having color blindness or lighting blindness and
Yes.
taking breaks, and I was asking, do you just stop? Do you have a technique?
So I do get it all the time, and like I said, I can start feeling it happen. Like you'll be looking at what you're working on and be like, I can't see the errors in this anymore. So one, that's a great time to ask for feedback. Two, if you do have multiple things that you're working on, go to another thing and you can come back to it once you've probably got feedback. Um, yeah, just give yourself time to look at something else if that is the possibility. Sometimes I'm very sympathetic to you literally just working on the one thing. But if that's the case, then are there different sections to that? Like if you were focusing on a table light for like 3 hours, is there a back room light that you can now focus on instead? Like try to find ways to give your eyes breaks from it.
I have experienced sometimes where if I do it for too long, I ruin the work that I already did. It kind of goes downwards instead because I'm like something's wrong or something, and it's just me having stared for too long at one environment or one piece, basically.
So with that
Um,
with that thing, I take regular screenshots of my work throughout the entire process, so I can kind of go back and go, oh no, it looked better there. I've lost it.
so, is there because I like there's one thing I've heard some lighting artists say as well is when they want to look at the piece and check if something's wrong or missing, they'll I think they picked it up from traditional art or something. I believe my art director also uses this technique. Is they just invert the image, they just rotate it upside down just to see it completely, differently. Is that something you do? Have you heard about it before, or how's that?
So there's a couple of versions of that. So you can invert the image, make the image black and white, or do the squint test. The squint test is basically where you just kind of like close your eyes, and if you can still kind of get the feel from the blurred image, then it's probably okay.
And
Maybe.
if not, you should panic. You should be, oh no, shit,
Yeah.
this is good.
If not,
No.
you've gone wrong somewhere.
What is that? So, which one do you prefer? Squinting the eye?
I use the squint test and the black and white test mostly.
Right. Okay. And would you recommend people when they do the lighting that they do it because now you say because you said black and white, so now you're coming into values, and it's something a lot of people struggle with when they picking up lighting is for there's two things. There's to put light exactly where they see it in the picture if they're even using a reference. Most people are not using reference, but
Use
those
reference people.
but those who do choose to use a reference, they look at the image. Okay, that's a light source. Put one light, and that's another light and put one light. So that's obviously a different topic as well. But in terms of values and black and white, do you think it's a good idea for people to just work on black and white in the beginning, just to get the values and understanding the tonal differences, or
I don't
is
think
there
you
a different
necessarily have
approach?
to just work on black and white, but I think you should be checking it because light is tone at the end of this. It's intensity values. So one of the best ways to know if your blacks are too black is to check that,
Yeah.
or if your whites are too white, check it. Like the tone maps are there for a reason. And I love black and white. I've always loved black and white photography. I love black and white imagery. And I think teaching yourself how to look at that is a very good way to do it. And if you look at old cinematography techniques, I'm talking about when we have black and white film, they did stuff like that. So it's got a good history backing to say it might work.
Looking at your pieces, I believe most of your pieces do have a very high contrast to them as well. You're not too afraid to go into the dark, so you're not too afraid to go into the bright either. Looking just at the thumbnails alone. What do you feel about when people do get clipping, as in too white and too black? Where do you stand on that, creatively speaking? Do you think it's okay to go to that extent, or do you always or generally recommend people to avoid that?
I think creatively, I'm never going to say to anyone, don't do something, because there's always going to be something that breaks that rule. I think don't do it straight away, at very least. I'm not a big fan of utter pure black. I think you should always see some information. And if you do use pure black, it should be for a reason. I don't agree with pure black everywhere. I agree with like maybe a moment of darkness that then lights up. Like stuff like that should be used for moments of suspense. It shouldn't be your entire piece.
Sound very poetic. A moment of darkness and then light. It's like a movie pitch. Nice. So there's also this concept of never having black shadow, but having color in the shadows as well. Where do you stand on that topic?
Again, I think there's always things that are going to break the rules. And if you are using color in your shadows, you need to know why you're using color in your shadows. Like, I don't think you should just be. Sometimes, unfortunately, when I see people when they're first getting into it, they kind of throw colors in everywhere and they don't know why they're throwing in colors everywhere. It's like, is it a sunset, so therefore you have purpley blue shadows, or is it a nighttime, so you're doing the whole Hollywood thing of you're going to make it blue instead of black. Like, you need to know why you're using colors, where you're
Yeah.
using them.
Obviously, it's a sunset with purplish blue shadow. Obviously, that's what we're talking about. Magical sunset for sure. All right. So, if you could go back in time and you could tell you something that would make your life easier today, what would that be?
Probably a lot of stuff that I've been telling people.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So you would be sending this video back in time and say, "Watch this,
I'd be
Willow."
like, listen to this person. They've been through enough to understand. Like,
good.
yeah, I think learn to fail quicker. Like, I think I've failed fairly quickly a lot in my life, but do it even faster because it just saves you time.
And have you had a chance to use Unreal Engine 5 yet?
I have actually. The piece I was just showing was an Unreal 5.
Which one was that? Let me just put the stream up.
This one that I had up. This is you.
Oh, yeah, this is a Lumen test on the right side there. Okay. And what's your opinion between Lumen and Unreal Engine 4? The pros, the cons, the advantages or disadvantages of it. Do you have any thought on that?
Oh, I'm extremely excited for Lumen and Unreal 5 when it gets fully released. I think using more realistic values and is a very good forward way for us light artists to go, because it kind of gives you more scope to learn realism and then break things. And I always think you need to start on realism before you can make something cinematographic, like make them, arty.
Right.
Like, it needs to start somewhere realistic. Even a stylized piece, I think, needs to be realistic and then made stylized.
Right. Kind of like what we're doing in our game, stylization and all that filtering stuff. So what I want to know as well is the thing I have with Unreal 5, at least when I'm doing mentorship and teaching, is I ask the students to use Unreal Engine 4. And that's because Unreal Engine 5 does a lot of the work for you, and it doesn't necessarily teach you to see and to understand why the math, the technology is doing, like the indirect light, the bounce light. It doesn't necessarily prepare you to understand why it's doing it. It doesn't necessarily prepare you to change it, adjust it, because you're not really training your eye. So I normally encourage people to stick to Unreal Engine 4 right now, also because I'm obviously much better at that. I haven't really touched Unreal Engine 5 too much either. But where do you stand on the technology advantage? Sure, it makes lighting easier, but if someone new jumps in and they pick up Unreal Engine 5, do you think that they might be skipping some foundational learning process because it's doing a lot of the basic stuff now?
I mean, I would argue that it doesn't make it easier if you're a good lighter. A good lighter knows there's still a lot of work to do there under the hood, and 9 times out of 10, what comes into the box tin isn't the right thing to go with. So I don't necessarily think it does all the work for you. And if you do think it's doing all the work for you, you've probably made a mistake somewhere, because it's never that easy. Our jobs are never going to be that easy. And I think learning basic principles is good, though. Like, I think it's very good to understand what came before so you can understand what is in there now.
Because I remember before ray tracing and all those things and indirect lighting, you would have to manually place all the light, kind of like what people are sometimes doing when they do real-time light in Unreal Engine 4. You have to know where to put the bounce light, you have to know what's missing and why the shadows are so black, basically. Especially if you come from Maya and stuff like that, you also have to have a better understanding of just, as you talked about earlier, having an eye to understand what's missing so you can actually put it into action. And that's kind of why I noticed, at least a lot of people, they can make some really nice stuff as a non-lighter now in Unreal Engine 5, but I also think you need to be more creative if you're going to use Unreal Engine 5 now, because it is doing a lot of the heavy lifting or out of the box, which is obviously why people use Unreal Engine 5. But I do think you need to stand out more in other areas, as we talked previously: composition, color theory, storytelling, mood. I think you need to be even better at that now as a lighting artist, even
Yeah.
if you want to stand out in the coming time.
Well, like, I think those things that you just mentioned are the things that make someone a good lighting artist, where you can kind of show your worth. Because you are, like I said, you use lighting to express narrative and mood. So that is a good part of our jobs.
So, according to you, if you have any information or knowledge about this, if not, we can just speculate. Question is: film and TV versus games. Which industry has better job stability for a lighter?
I've never worked in film. I've only ever worked in games, but what I can say is that I know a lot of people find more stability within the games industry because you tend to do a lot more permanent work if you can get in with the company. A lot of films, even if it's a big studio, they only hire you for the film that you're working on.
So, you can work for outsourcing companies, JL. There are certain studios which are technically also game studios sometimes that you can work for, and they can obviously give you access to, as Willow is saying, a lot of movie projects. So you're not necessarily working for the film, but you're working for the company who has all the contacts to get you the projects to work on, basically. But I don't think either of us are qualified to state which one is more stable. What I can tell you, JL, a lot of people have during COVID came from movies into games. I've seen a lot of people coming from the movies because people stopped making movies for a period of time, and then the people like cinematic artists specifically, they also needed to find jobs, so they went into narrative games, like the company I'm working at. A lot of my colleagues are straight from the movies. Some are going back now that COVID it's kind of coming down a bit, and some movies are starting again, which is interesting as well. Do you want to go into films by any chance, Rello?
No, I think games where my heart is. I mean, I can't really tell what the future's going to hold. Maybe one day there's a project that'll take my fancy, but games is where I'm at.
Do you play any games at all then?
I am a big gamer.
Or what are you playing right now?
I'm a fan of fantasy RPGs. So I haven't actually started anything new right this second, but in terms of what my favorite game was, is probably the God of War series or the Diablo series. I
Right.
did actually just play Diablo Resurrected. That's a lie.
You liar. Keeping information from us. So, of the games you remember, is there any games you would consider has great lighting and we should watch it or play it to kind of learn from it and deconstruct it?
I think Naughty Dog are fantastic at everything they do. So I'd start there. Like The Last of Us, whether or not you liked the narrative of the second game, it was beautiful.
Right. So the Naughty Dog franchise games, I guess, are a good opportunity to review. I mean, a lot of people are kind of lighting. If you go on our stations, there's a lot of inspiration from Naughty Dog and Uncharted specifically. A lot of people do that, so it makes sense. Control was someone else answered Control.
Control is beautiful in
Um,
terms of brutalism.
it's good, that's I played it, but I didn't necessarily enjoy the game itself too much, but it was definitely fun to go into photo mode. And then I tried Red Dead Redemption 2 photo mode, couldn't get it to work properly or save the images all the time. Some games have clunky photo mode, but I do think photo mode is a very interesting way of learning
Yeah.
in games now that we didn't have that much before, and also a very creative way to practice some of your skills actually as a digital photographer. Do you know of any game that has a good photo mode that you could recommend people to go into and kind of practice framing, composition, tweak the lighting a little bit?
I'm not too sure about photo mode, but I can tell you what I do when I play games is I spend and it takes me forever to finish a game because I spend quite a lot of time kind of just like running around looking at things up close and being like, that's a pretty god ray. I like where the light's hitting there.
And
That's
then
nice.
you die.
And then I die because I get shot in the head. Yeah, so it's a bit of a brutal way to do it, but it does help.
Yeah, that's for sure. Have you played Hitman yet?
I haven't, no.
So the new Hitman, I was doing a breakdown video for that on my other channel, and that was kind of interesting because all of the lights are real time, right? So you can go around, you can shoot the lights and everything. And I wanted to know um, how they light it after all the lights are gone, basically. And it's pretty bright because they make it pretty contrasty and give the illusion that it's contrasty. But once you shoot all the lights, it's super bright. You can still see a lot. So that was kind of interesting to try Hitman 3. So I think that's a good game as well. Because you can shoot the light, basically. Not every game allows you to shoot the light, unfortunately.
I spent a lot of time doing that, probably.
Yeah, why not? You could probably pick up a few tricks doing that as well. So, final words. How would you recommend someone to improve as a lighting artist when they are already employed as a lighting artist? Because something I think we all feel pressure of is maybe not competition, but there's like a hidden pressure of always learning because the technology improves a lot drastically, and then maybe you change studio and there's a new engine you have to learn. How do you have any early experiences as a student who just became graduate? You talked about that you read to the documentation, and this is very early on, but this never stops. This continues regardless if you're a senior or a lead. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how to keep yourself motivated and kind of go through this continuous process of life learning, as I call it?
I think you never stop learning, right? And if you do think you've learned everything, you're in trouble because that's incorrect. I love what I do, so it doesn't. I kind of spend a lot of my time reading about lighting, and I watch a lot of films, and I watch a lot of documents, and I'm part of communities like Lighting Bot, where you just, even if you're not actively communicating because you're busy, read through it and kind of take the time to engage in that information, even if it's 10 to 15 minutes a day. Buy yourself a couple of books on cinematography. A good one is called Painting with Light. If anyone wants to check that out on Amazon, it's a good starter one. And it'll kind of go through a lot of the things that I've probably mentioned because it's things that I hold quite close to my heart. But yeah, just love it and it'll come quite naturally to learn it.
Painting with light, you say? Oh, first published 1949.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, that's a pretty old book. I don't have it actually, so I'll grab that one as well. If anyone mentions any content, I'm like, oh, I don't have it. I need to get it. So you mentioned movies. Do you have any? I really don't like asking these questions because I never remember the answer if someone asked me it. But I'm gonna ask it. You can, if you remember, you remember. Do you have any cinematographer or any movies that you think is like super good for someone who's into lighting, basically? Not
So
necessarily the story. It doesn't matter if the story is bad. Just be talking about director, photographer kind of stuff.
I think most Del Toro movies are fantastic. Crimson Peak's a fantastic movie for lighting and cinematography. Drive, I can't remember who directs it now, it's a fantastic movie. Most of Kubrick's work, The Shining, stuff like that, really fantastic for cinematography, understanding symmetry and understanding how light affects mood, especially with how you can drive suspense while things are still lit very well.
That's a lot of references for people to look up.
I like
And
movies.
so, would you say you play more or watch movies more in terms of learning lighting?
I probably watch more now just because it's a bit easier to digest with my job. But I still do play whenever I can.
So, when you watch, are you watching for entertainment, or do you like watch it? I don't know, for entertainment first, and then you take notes and watch it again. How does that work?
So I watch things for entertainment, but unfortunately my brain never switches off. So I watch things and I immediately go, that's a pretty composed shot. Look at look at the way that they've backlit that character. That's just how my brain works. Unfortunately, it's kind of annoying because I can never fully enjoy a movie like with unanalytically, but
I remember that. I remember that in a different context because when I many years ago when I graduated and I was focusing on game design and level design first, and when I was playing games, I could never really enjoy games anymore because I was looking at the player path and the psychology behind it and the design and the architecture and stuff like that. So I can relate to that already back then. It happened, but I do think because I was on a cinematography course a few weeks ago before my operation, and it was on Raindance festival before the Raindance festival, which is I think happening or has happened already now. It was a 1 week course, and I talked to a lot of people who are like professionally in the movies there, and they were saying the same thing that because they work with movies and they work with as a gaffer or something like that, like with the lights, they can't really always enjoy a movie anymore because they're kind of looking at it from a professional point of view as well. So you haven't? Are you saying you haven't learned the trick yet on how to turn off your brain and just enjoy the movie?
Oh, absolutely not. If anyone has any tips about that, hit me up because I it's been quite some time and I still can't do it.
That would be probably the next episode, finding someone who knows how to do that and can pass on the knowledge for that. So we do have a couple of minutes left before I let you go on to your day or night in our case, I guess. So I do want to know, what do you think is the hardest part with your role?
The hardest part with my job.
Mm.
Um,
My boss. No, just kidding.
no, I wouldn't say that. My boss is awesome. Oh no. I think
I got
not
you this
getting
thing.
overwhelmed, actually. Not getting overwhelmed with too much information at once.
So when you say information, is that like deadline related, or is that just people disturbing you because of remote working?
I think that comes to digesting accurate information.
Right. Because I know a lot of people are overwhelmed also because of remote working. People are also saying to me that people are more quicker in terms of messaging and you don't know if you're interrupting someone because you don't know what they're doing, you don't see them, so you're like, should I be interrupting now, should I not be interrupting? So you end up sometimes with a lot of messages and a lot of information, a lot of bugs in some cases from different departments as well. So if that's your hardest part, what's your favorite part?
The art side of it, definitely. And I think kind of when you see someone's reaction to something, and like if you want something to be scary and you see someone's face actually get scared, that's the cool part because you know you've won that battle.
You're like, yeah. Victory. That's good. And I had the question, where was this? There was a specific question. I actually didn't write it down, but I had it in my head while you were talking. I hate it. I'm trying to listen and pick up a new question, but also remember when you're saying stuff. So I asked you about the hardest question, and I asked you about what's your favorite. Optimization was my question because it's not something I always forget to ask that to people, but today I remember it. So in terms of optimization, how do you deal with it? Is it challenging for you? Is it do you often have to reduce the quality of your work because of it? Do you do it when you're doing it originally? Do it at the end? How does it work for you?
I don't find optimization overly challenging because I know the rules for whatever I'm working on. I don't think of it too much at the start, but I also don't go crazy. So there's a balance to achieve when you're starting because obviously the focus is the look, but don't be weird with it and start giving everything volumetrics and translucent shadows and stuff like that because you're just a recipe for disaster.
Tell me about that. Life's really hard as a lighting artist. You just want to add all the good stuff, and then you're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, no. I could do that in real life. Just put it in a fog machine, problem solved.
Sure.
It's interesting though, because you have the real life. They have their own challenges because they have to add reflectors and blockers and other stuff to achieve some of the stuff we can do quite easy in games. But at the same time, they can do some stuff that it doesn't have the technical limitations. So they can get like a lot of shots, a lot of sequences that just looks amazing, and it would never probably work in
Never
most games.
0.5 second frames. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the publisher goes, sorry, you can't. You have to go back and you have to remove all of it, and you have to start over again. Do you light with volumetric on, or is that like the last thing you do, or do you tweak it as you're doing lighting?
I establish what my main lights are. You kind of figure out what's going to get you most bang for your buck, and you use that as your expensive light, and everything else has to build up from that.
Cool. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I only asked for 1 hour. So before we leave, I'm just going to remind people about that we do portfolio review. We do have highlights for people who are part of the community. We do have Unreal tutorials. We have lighting tutorials for Unity. We have mentorship if you want to fast track your career or improve your career. And besides this interview, there's a lot of other interviews with breakdowns and information and so on. So do keep watching after this stream is over by going to the YouTube channel or the website lightingbot.com. Now, before we end this stream, Willow, do you have any final things you want to share or promote yourself, or maybe something? I don't know.
Go give me a follow on ArtStation, and I'm always up for a conversation. So any questions, or you just want to talk random lighting stuff or films or games, whatever, give me a shout.
Cool. So we're gonna wave goodbye, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more with Willow before she heads off. So thanks for watching, everyone. Please leave a subscribe or comment or like. The YouTube algorithm is not really nice to us, so keep that up. Thank you, and